Yeah, keep the.
Okay. So as you may remember, we've gone through a lot of the how do you get started in federal government contracting, and we've talked about how to get into. I'm just going to do a quick summary since we have a couple new people today. We talked about how to get into the SAM system, and we talked about, which is the system for award management. Everybody has to be in SAM in order to get government contracts. And then we talked about how to find opportunities in FedBizOps. And we talked about how there are opportunities that are brand new requirements. And we talked about requirements that were from incumbent contractors. And we talked about requirements that are existing with large prime contractors right now that we might want to try to subcontract to. Thereby realizing that there's lots of different ways to get into government business, and depending on what makes the most sense for you, is the best path to take. When you prime a deal, when you prime a contract with the federal government, that's the most work for you. If you subcontract to another company, you'll just have a smaller piece of the pie, but you can still grow your business through subcontracts. We also talked about the small business requirements. We looked up our NAICS codes, which were the National Association for Industry Classifications, and we found out where our businesses, all the products and services within our business, which NAICS codes they fell under. And the NAICS codes were important because they were the ones that the government was going to use to identify what products and services they need, thereby matching your products and services with the codes that they're looking for. And that's how you win government business. We also talked about other ways to market to the federal government when the government asks for a request for information, or sometimes we can write position papers. And then we talked about the actual RFP process and everything that the government did to get into, to have a solicitation. And we talked about how the Constitution starts off with very broad goals and ideals for our nation. And each of those broad goals and ideals are taken down a level to the programs that are required to implement those broad goals and ideas. And then each of those programs has certain needs that have to, certain requirements that have to be met in order for them to come to fruition. So each program manager has to do basically a make or buy decision. Do we want to do this internally with government resources, or do we want to go to external sources, which is how we get involved? When they decide to come outward to us and use external resources, they put together something called a solicitation document or a request for proposal. And a request for proposal has sections A through M. And we walk through what each of the sections meant and how that's the uniform contract code, contract format, and that's where you can look for types of information that you need to bid on the proposal. Once they issue the request for proposal, they issue it on FedBizOps, then we as contractors can go in and get an account on FedBizOps. It's a free account, and you can see all the things that the government's buying across all its different agencies, both civilian agencies like FAA and NIH, as well as all the DoD agencies. Once you identify, there's way too many opportunities out there for you to bid on all of them, so you need to narrow in on what particular opportunity you want to go after. And once you do that, you pull down that request for proposal and you respond to it with a proposal. Typically there are 4 main sections to a proposal, sometimes less, but it always started, you have to respond to the technical volume, which we're going to talk about in a second. There's a management volume that talks about all the resumes and processes that your organization uses to be able to meet the government requirement. There's a contracts volume that's typically a signed contract that you send back to them. And finally, there's the pricing volume, and we're going to get into the pricing volume today. Just turn my phone, let me turn it off. Okay, and then we went through the entirely detailed process that the government goes through on their side to get secure funding and get approval for this RFP to come out. And we talked about how they evaluate our proposals. So with that sort of context, what I want to do is start getting into the nitty-gritties. Today, in particular, we're going to talk about how you specifically write to the technical volume, and then we're going to talk about how you do pricing, because those are really the 2 key ingredients. Keep in mind, everything I say about the technical volume could also apply to the management volume, but the management you're typically writing about your own processes for how to do quality control and things like that, your resumes. So we'll glean some of the lessons from that to this chapter. Okay, so somebody needs to be in charge of technical volume. It could be the same person that's writing everything, it could be the same person doing pricing, it could be you, right, that's doing all components of it. But basically, you want to make sure you understand what Section L looks like. Section L is the list of all the requirements for how they want to see the proposal. Section M is where they're going to tell you how they're planning on evaluating the proposal, so you want to make sure that you pay attention. So one of the things L will tell you is how many pages that you're allowed. And as we mentioned, if it says 30 pages and you give them 32 because you're an overachiever type A personality, they will rip off the last 2 pages and not evaluate them. So you always want to make sure you stick to the page counts and you give them exactly what they're asking for in the order in which they're asking for. Not that they're, the reason why you give them in the exact format that they're asking for is because they have created, by this point, they've taken the RFP, and the Source Selection Committee has gone through every element of the RFP to identify how you're going to, what your opportunities are in terms of achieving points for that particular requirement. So if you do something that's out of order, they're not going to be able to find where it is in your proposal, therefore they can't give you the points. So it's best to be just very, very specific to the Section L requirements. That way you're giving them the document in exactly the form they're looking for, and they can evaluate you and give you the most points. They're also, Section M will tell you what's most important. So if they're giving you something that's, like when they tell you the most important criteria, that's where you should be putting the bulk of your writing. So if they say the technical excellence is the #1 priority and it's worth 50%, you want to make sure you're demonstrating technical excellence. You know, if they tell you the price is most important, then you know you just want to make sure you address all the requirements, but really sharpen your pencil when it comes to price. Then you look at the rest of the RFP and determine any other requirements that will impact the technical volume. So you always need to look at the RFP as a complete and total requirements document. A lot of people tend to hone in on, can I do Section C and can I meet all those technical requirements without paying attention to all the other terms and conditions. I went out to a small business in Holsbo, Washington State one time, and they literally had taken the Section C and were paying lots of attention to Section C and just completely ignored Sections A, A through N. That's very dangerous because the government looks at that entire document as being the requirements document, and if you're going to take any exception to any of those terms and conditions, you have to do it in the cover letter. And if you don't, they assume you're going to do everything in there. So you set yourself up for a battle right off the bat if you don't do that. And then typically the proposal manager or you comes up with a compliance matrix. And this is basically to make sure you have everything covered. So you're looking through the RFP document and you're seeing what requirements they have, and you're making sure that people are writing to every to the requirements. So that's what the compliance matrix does. And then once you complete the compliance matrix, then you assign each part of the compliance matrix to a particular writer. So you want to make sure that everything's being addressed. Again, if you're doing this yourself, you're doing your own checks and balances, but when you start talking about the really large procurements, this is what you do. Now, I'm an actual writer, so this is what I would have to do. I would review every single RFP requirement in the compliance matrix. So hopefully someone's done that homework for me, and I'm looking at that compliance matrix, and I know that I have to write to all those things. And then I come up with a list of components within my company. They could be products or services of what's required to meet this particular requirement. So right now I'm just making a broad list of everything, and then I have to go through the physical process of determining how to source each component. Am I doing it internally with my own resources? So this is just like the make or buy decision that the government does. Or am I going to contract it out to someone else? Or have we already decided that we're going to subcontract this and not prime it, in which case I'm only writing little pieces. So your choices are you can do the work or make the component internally. In other words, you can provide the service yourself, or you can make the component yourself. You can hire another company to do the work, and that means that the component will be made externally. And then from your point of view, if you have, some companies set up strategic sourcing agreements with vendors. And if that's the case, then you can go to your strategic sources and figure out which components they can provide. And then for everything else, you have to figure out how to source it. So what I'm going to tell you is the correct way to do it, and what you can get away with right now. Okay, so right now, as small businesses, you can figure out who your supplier, who you want to work with, and award them the business. When you become a large company, you actually have to, everything that you're not strategically sourcing, you actually have to go through an RFP process. So you take the government's RFP and you skinny it down, and you send it out to at least 3 vendors, and they select the, they write proposals to you, and then you evaluate them, and you make your award decision. Now, why am I telling you you can get away with that now? As a small business, you are not required to comply with contractor purchasing system review. As a large business, you are required to comply with contractor purchasing system review. What's the point of a contractor purchasing system review? It's called CPSR. Basically, the government, just like the government, if I'm a government contracting officer, I can't give all my business as a contracting officer to my sister. Why can't I do that?
Conflict.
Yeah. It's a conflict. What else?
Might not meet subcontracting requirements.
Might not meet the subcontracting requirements. What else?
A dragnet move.
I'm sorry?
A dragnet move.
Yeah, right.
Change the name, fit the end.
Yeah. And another thing is my sister, go ahead.
It gives a perception that you're being impartial,
Yeah,
or you are being impartial.
right, right. And then my sister, knowing that she's going to get all my business, what could she do to her prices?
Escalating.
How do you feel about that as taxpayers?
About the same as I do now.
Hasn't really changed much. Yeah, so it's really important that when we think about the requirement that the government imposes on themselves, they want us as prime contractors to impose the same requirements on ourselves. They don't require you to do it as a small business, but they do require you to do it as a large business. So why am I talking about it now to you? I'm talking about it now to you because the government sort of takes a lot of their regulations, not a lot, there are some regulations that they say these only apply to large businesses. And there are other requirements that say small businesses, you don't have to pay attention to all these. Very few of these you can pay attention to. And the government really does try to bend over backwards to help you guys out. So for example, help us out, I'm a small business too. There was one time where I was with EDS, which was a large business, but we were subbed to a small company. We came in and it was for vibration monitoring systems. So these are little widgets that you put on the sides of equipment on a ship. And basically, a component on a ship will vibrate at a certain threshold. And by analyzing that data, you can determine whether the part's about to break, in which case it should be on the next protocol to get it, a new component put in, or whether a commander can wait maybe 6 months before they have to fix that particular piece. So, useful system. Well, when we came in, the contracting officer turns to the small business and says, I understand you were terminated for default on the contract with the Navy. So this is obviously, as a large company subcontracting to a small business, this is not what you want to hear right off the bat through negotiations. And come to find out, what had happened was that the president of the company said the widget is supposed to be attached to the component. The adhesive we were using wasn't effective. We've replaced the adhesive. And with that, he whips out from his pocket just a metal bolt, and he whips out a piece of metal, and he whips out some adhesive, and nobody's talking during, like, we're just having our regular business conversation during this, and he slaps some of this adhesive onto the bolt, and he slaps it onto slaps it onto the metal, and just lets it sit there in the middle of the table. So as the conversation's going on, nobody's touching that thing, but you can see the contracting officer keeps looking at it, and right as we're about to wrap up the negotiations and she's going to make a determination as to whether or not we're going to win this piece of business or not, she picks up the thing, she tries to pry it apart, can't pry it apart, and we win the business. I would submit to you the large company cannot get away with that. We would have to have a very formal live test demonstration to verify that things work and things like that. The government could have just said right there and then, hey, we just terminated you over here last week because you weren't compliant. I'm not going to hire you here because you make me nervous that you're going to be non-compliant for me too, and you're going to make me look bad as the contracting officer. But yet they didn't do that, right? They awarded the contract to the government. So my point is that there's two reasons why you should start pushing yourselves in the direction of conducting solicitations. One is the CPSR audit. So as a large business, what's going to happen is there's going to be a review, we're going to talk about it later today, where the government comes in and looks at your purchasing process and actually pulls a report from you and verifies that you are following the requirements for a solicitation. And if they pick one that you've done well on, or they'll pick a bunch of them, but if they pick all the ones that you've done well on, in other words, you followed the solicitation process, you are golden. If they pick any that you dropped the ball on and didn't complete the solicitation, they can withdraw your capability to purchase from government for a period of time. And that's a pain. And we'll talk about the ramifications of that later. So CPSR is one reason why you should start getting into the habit of conducting solicitations. The second reason why you should do this is because when the government evaluates your proposal today, what they do is they take their RFP document, they take your proposal, and they take their source selection plan. And they go through the first requirement of the RFP, they look at what your answer is, and based on your answer, they look at that source selection plan to figure out how many points they should give you, whether they should give you a pass or a fail, because every agency does different evaluation methods. So some of them use numbers, some of them use colors, some of them use words, but basically they're evaluating your proposal to see if you're compliant. And they go through that painstaking process for every single requirement. There are a couple agencies that have started doing a new way of evaluation. And what they've done is they have created a document that is like a checklist that if you meet certain criteria, you get points. And when you get those points, the more points you get, the better off you are. So I'll give you an example. HCAT was a procurement done by GSA and Office of Personnel Management. And what they were looking for were three things. They wanted people who could come in and help the government with human resource activities. So basically supplement the government's own human resource capabilities. They wanted somebody to be able to come in and provide training services. And they wanted people to come in and collect metrics of how agencies were doing. So instead of that traditional model that I just mentioned about evaluation with the source selection plan, the RFP, and the proposal, instead what they did was they said to contractors, here's a checklist, and here's basically a scoring sheet. And these are all the components that we feel are important. And we're going to release this RFP two different ways. One for large businesses that only large businesses can go after, and one for small businesses that only small businesses can go after. And they were the exact same requirements. Anybody see a problem so far? Okay, remember, when I need coffee, I ask you a question and you talk so I can sip my coffee. So I'm sure we all understand each other.
Compliance is going to be more difficult for the smaller businesses.
Correct, right? Because I just told you, some regulations apply to big and some require to small. So the government said, no, this is a fair competition because large businesses are competing against who?